Well, good morning from St. Bart's in Midtown Manhattan. My name is Peter Thompson. I serve as the vicar here, and whether you're joining us here in person on Park Avenue or online at stbarts.org, it is my joy and delight to welcome you to the forum where each week we have sacred conversations about the things that matter. This Sunday, we are especially delighted to welcome the Reverend Margaret Rose. She serves as the Deputy for Ecumenical and Interreligious Relations at the Episcopal Church, the presiding bishop's deputy for Ecumenical and Interreligious Relations. She has been working on our behalf at the denominational level for 21 years, I think, and serving in this role for 13. She's a treasure and a huge asset to the Episcopal Church on a very big scale. So, Margaret, we're so delighted that you were willing to take the time and be with us this morning.
Great. Thank you so much. And I'm going to turn this down a little bit. Can you all hear me? I can hear me too, so I'm echoing. Well, I'm so glad to be here at St. Bart's, and of course I've had occasion to come to St. Bart's from time to time for different reasons, notably a lot of events from the Church Center when we need to be not at 815 2nd Avenue. We come to our second home, which is St. Bart's, and Peter told me also that there's an event here even tomorrow. I also have been involved with St. Bart's sometimes because of the ecumenical work and doing some negotiations with the Greek Orthodox Church, who would like very much for St. Bart's to be their church. And they have done a St. Bartholomew's Day service here for the last, I don't know if it's 2 or 3 years. So it's been great to have the sense that you and your own DNA are very much an ecumenical church. I will say, maybe 35 years ago, or maybe 40, I did apply for a job here. And it was as the director of what was then the Young Adult Center. I'm not sure exactly what it was. I had worked with Tom Bowers, and so that's, I think, the reason I got the interview, but not the job. I was particularly related. I really wanted to work someplace that had a swimming pool. So, oh well, okay. So I'm in any case, really, really glad to be here today. I know that you all have a long history of ecumenical and interreligious engagement and really engaging across religious difference. That you've had a rabbi on your staff and also I think it's called the Center for Religious Inquiry. So you are not unfamiliar with the kinds of things that I am going to talk about today. As Peter mentioned, this ecumenical and interreligious work that I have been engaging in is about the work that happens at the church-wide level, where our role is, we hope, to provide resources, to provide information, and also to highlight the work that is going on the ground, because that's where it's really happening, and that is where I give great thanks that you are doing this work at such a deep level. Another serendipitous thing that happened today is that as I was preparing to speak to you, I was reminded of St. James Piccadilly Circus. And I was reminded of it because I read the obituary of Donald Reeves, who was the long ago rector of St. James Piccadilly. Donald Reeves was asked to take on this parish in Piccadilly Circus when it was a failing parish. And apparently the Archbishop of Canterbury at the time said to him, "You can do anything you want, just don't let it close." And the anything he wanted was turning that parish inside out. It was a society parish for society weddings, for society folk to come. And, I think they pretty much kept coming. But he also was very clear that it was also a church that was meant to be for all people, a church that was meant to be serving the poor. And one of the most wonderful examples that this story about Donald Reeves gave was that one Easter, he decided that there needed to be an Easter brunch for everybody. And so he rented out the space, in a hotel or it's the Mayfair Hotel, I think it was. In any case, the homeless people who were around Piccadilly Circus, the low-wage people who were around Piccadilly Circus, and the high-wage people who were around, or no need for wage people around that area also came. And it was that was a picture of the heavenly banquet. And he created that, or was able to help that to come to pass. So I thought about St. Bart's because, in fact, in the midst of many ups and downs, coming to pass over and over again is the heavenly banquet that arrives here, not just on Sundays, but all through the week. So I was trying to give Peter a little bit of information about what I was thinking about saying today, and he said, well, we're a linked parish with St. James Piccadilly, and they know all this that you're about to tell them. So I want to tell you that I'm glad to know it now and really grateful for having made that connection, both in my own heart as I was reading about Donald Reeves and with you. So I want to start by reading a poem that you may have seen this week that was written by Donald Reeves. And apparently it's gotten some controversial response, but I'm going to put it out here for whatever response, and then say a few words about that. It's called Eucharistic Prayer. We break this bread for those who love God, for those who follow the path of the Buddha and worship the God of the Hindus, for our sisters and brothers in Islam, for the Jewish people from whom we come. We break this bread for the great green earth. We call to mind the forests, fields, and flowers which we are destroying, that one day, with the original blessing, God's creation will be restored. We break this bread for those who have no bread, the starving, the homeless, and the refugees, that one day this planet may be a home for everyone. We break this bread for the broken parts of ourselves, the wounded child in all of us, for our broken relationships, that one day we may glimpse the wholeness that is of Christ. The title I offered for today's forum is Engaging Others, Knowing Ourselves. Because I believe this is the heart and soul, not just of ecumenical and interreligious work, but what it means to be a Christian. And it is doing that work that I believe helps us to glimpse the wholeness of Christ. For it is tied up in the wholeness of the world. This world that is beloved of God. And our work is to break bread for and break bread with all those who are in need, whoever they are, including, indeed, ourselves. So you all are already doing this ecumenical and interreligious work on the ground with a deep dive. And I want to share now in a sort of a short PowerPoint what we're doing at the church-wide level. And I won't do much explanation. I'll leave that for questions as we come afterwards. But I'll try to give you a sense of what happens through both domestically and internationally as we work together in this ecumenical and interreligious space. You see here at the beginning just some photos which include interreligious work, which include the advocacy work we do, which include also a labyrinth in Arizona, and also 2 pictures in Jerusalem. So we try to make this a sense of not simply looking inward, but helping us to break out from the bubble that too often is the Episcopal Church, or all of our small places that we work and live together. So So the Office of Ecumenical and Interreligious Relations seeks to support ecumenical and interreligious engagement. We use those words a lot so that people finally will say, what does that actually mean? Throughout our church, promoting understanding among all God's people. And we do that by supporting the public commitments of this church, and by that I mean those things that we have voted on sometimes at General Convention, and also those things that we believe are our advocacy responsibilities for the Episcopal Church and with our partners. We do it also through ecumenical dialogues and conversations with partner denominations and interfaith bodies, and also providing resources for formation, information, and engagement in ecumenical and interfaith work. We don't do this work alone. Nobody does it alone. And we do that with many, many partners. You'll see here our Greek Orthodox partners. You'll see here our Lutheran partners. You'll see here a Methodist partner and an event that was for the 500th anniversary of Luther in a church in Malmö in Sweden. So we have partners that we really are very deeply engaged with. We have what are called full communion partners. I can say more about that if there are questions. The most familiar of those full communion partners is probably the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America. I saw that you have 2 new people coming to St. Bart's who are retired Lutheran pastors, and that is exactly the kind of exchange that we are often engaged in, not just for folks who are coming to church, but sharing pastors, sharing mission, sharing ministry, sharing resources. The most recent full communion partner is the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Bavaria. I can say more about that later too, but just so that you see, these are the sort of official full communion partners. Now, there are some places where we're not yet at that stage of what is called full communion. I try to say full communion is about sharing the gifts of one another, not because we agree on everything, but actually because we can share the richness of our difference. And we're in the process of doing that also with the Presbyterian Church, the Roman Catholic Church, and with the United Methodist Church, officially speaking. Again, we don't just work with those particular denominations. We also work with larger ecumenical organizations like the World Council of Churches, which is a 338-member body worldwide, with the National Council of Churches, which has 37-member churches here in the United States. A group called Christian Churches Together, which is one of the newest of these bodies. The Christian Churches Together includes 5 families of churches: historically black churches, Protestant churches, Roman Catholic churches, evangelical Pentecostal churches, and Orthodox churches. So you can see the wide array of churches that are talking to one another across many lines of difference. One of the things that is mentioned there that is not a body so much, it's called the National Workshop on Christian Unity. And it's a forum that happens every year so that we can begin to talk about how we work together and what the religious landscape, primarily in the U.S. is, but also what it's looking like around the world and how we might engage. There's also another body, if you don't know, something called, there are all these acronyms, the Episcopal, Diocesan, Ecumenical, and Interreligious Officers. So every diocese, in principle, has an ecumenical officer who works on behalf of the bishop. The ecumenical officer for the Diocese of New York is Kurt Hart, and he is very active and engaged in similar kind of work on the judicatory level, we call it, on the diocesan level. And then there's some other interesting events that have happened over the last 4 or 5 years, which have put us in closer partnership with some of our full communion partners. And those are the Anglican and Lutheran churches, including the Episcopal Church in Canada and the United States. The Evangelical Lutheran Church in Canada, in the US, the Anglican Church of Canada, and the Episcopal Church, and soon to be the Moravians, by the way. And this is a group called Churches Beyond Borders. Together, we not only look at our theological issues, but we've been engaged in racial justice advocacy together, and in particular, more recently, related to the questions around Indigenous persons and the ways in which we deal with our own church's common history and some of the failures and need for repentance and forgiveness that we've been involved in. The Canadian churches are far ahead of us in their Truth and Reconciliation Commission related to that, but we work together on those things as well. Our interreligious engagement also is something, again, we do not do alone. We like to say we do interreligious work ecumenically. And I used to always say, nobody really cares what the Episcopalians think, but they do care what the Christians think. And so we have with that a number of policy statements through the Episcopal Church, our interreligious guidelines, which were confirmed and updated at this summer's convention, a policy paper called Holding Difference Together, Episcopal, Theological, and Practical Guides for Interreligious Relations. And then another couple of documents, one on Christian-Muslim relations and Christian-Jewish relations. And I'd like to say those are not just theoretical, they are also how do we relate to one another in a practical way? How do we engage one another in a deep way so that we get to know each other? And especially so we know each other so much that when something horrible happens or something fantastic happens, we've got one another on speed dial so we can say, how can we celebrate with you? How can we lament with you? How can we live together as we walk whatever is going on in our world today? There are two resolutions that were passed at General Convention this summer, and we will begin from our office, but also, I hope, in various diocesan spaces. You're probably already doing it. The first is a resolution called Combating Anti-Muslim Bias, and the second is a resolution on addressing anti-Semitism in the church and the world. And this is at a sort of larger level, but it's not unrelated, of course, to the divisions that we are experiencing today here in the United States, related to Israel-Palestine, related to all of those ways in which our friendships are put to the test, and how can we be allies with our Muslim partners and with our Jewish partners. We also work together with Religions for Peace USA. The work of Religions for Peace is worldwide, and ours is a US chapter in which we work together on various issues. You may have seen, or I'm happy to put you on the list for seeing, the webinars that have been put together. We have worked on these issues that I've just described, among others. And then through the National Council of Churches, we are part of an interreligious convening table. And that's what I meant when I said we do our interreligious work ecumenically. The National Council of Churches sponsors dialogues that I have been a part of, and other Episcopalians have very much been a part of. Muslim Christian, Jewish Christian, Buddhist Christian, Hindu, and Sikh for now are our official dialogues that we're involved in, which involves also action at some points. We can't do this work with others without being aware that we are called to advocate for justice, and that we are called, that their ecumenical task is to recognize those church-dividing things which may be more doctrinal, but also those church-dividing things like racism, that are as theological as you can get. We can't take those, we can't put those apart. So our work is also together with these dialogues to be engaged in advocacy. One of the ecumenical bodies that we do this particularly with is a group called Shoulder to Shoulder. And Shoulder to Shoulder was originally, where the Episcopal Church was a founding member of Shoulder to Shoulder, originally formed to counter anti-Muslim bias and discrimination. In the last 2 years, as we have become aware that hate speech is rampant in too many places, our work has been to focus on anti-Muslim bias as well as anti-Semitism. I'm grateful. I happen to be the current co-chair of our executive committee, and the other co-chair is a woman named Esther Liederman, who is a director at the URJ, Union of Reform Judaism. And this particular body, I will say, has also training tools, a program called Faith Over Fear that we've been able to offer around the churches, and there's even been one in New York a couple of years ago, I think, but that's something also to tell you about. We work closely with our Office of Government Relations through our public policy network, and also, of course, with the people who are together in that office. We do lobbying and use their resources for advocacy as well as civic engagement. And I can't stop without mentioning the United Nations. The Episcopal Church is now an ECOSOC member, we have permission to speak member, let me call it, at the United Nations, and also is the World Council of Churches, with whom we work very closely. And a lot of those issues are done through a group called Ecumenical Women, if it's about women's work, but also the World Council plays a very big convening role for the Episcopal Church and other denominations to engage in work that is happening in the civil sector of the United Nations. And finally, I'll just introduce two other staff people that I work with, Salmoon Bashir and Hank Janelle. And we couldn't resist showing you this banner, which for us, this whole idea of engaging others and knowing more about who we are is not least also a Pentecost statement. I say that because our hope is the biblical mandate that all may be one, but it doesn't mean alike. It's about unity in diversity, and our belief is that there can be no unity unless you have diversity, and that's what Pentecost was all about. So I will leave it at that and welcome your questions.
Thank you so much, Margaret. And yes, applause. We have plenty of time for your questions. If you're here in the room, Suzanne Vorster has question cards. Just raise your hand. She'll come around and give you one, and then bring those cards up here. If you're joining us online, you can type your questions into the live chat on YouTube, the comments on Facebook, or email me, pthompson@stbarts.org. Email also works if you're here in the room.
I'll say one thing. What I didn't go into, and I'll just say some big topics that we are working on, for example, with our Office of Government Relations and others, is with something called the Baptist Joint Committee as part of a group called Christians Against Christian Nationalism. And a lot of our work has been related to Christian nationalism, white Christian nationalism, but also looking ecumenically at religious nationalisms around the world. So there are those issues that we engage in, as well as I mentioned, Palestine, Israel. How do we walk that line? And also questions around climate change. As you probably know, the Episcopal Church was at the COP with some controversy because of our connections with Armenia, but nevertheless we were there and tried to stand for human rights as well as for climate justice. So just to mention those.
Yeah, and the bit about Christian nationalism leads a little bit into the first question, which is, many Christians or people who identify as Christians are not included in the bodies in which you are engaged in dialogue, say non-denominational evangelical churches, etc. And of course, an increasingly large part of our country is secular. Can you talk about the relevance of continuing to have these conversations when we're not having them with everyone necessarily?
Well, I will say two things about that, because I think we are, when I say we, I mean sort of like the sort of traditional ecumenical bodies that I mentioned, except for within those, when you were listening carefully, I'm sure that you heard with Christian churches together, one of the families is the evangelical Pentecostal family. And the hard conversations that those who are not particularly in that group are having together with the evangelical Pentecostal body are very real. The Baptist Joint Committee also includes Southern Baptists from time to time in it around these Christian nationalism groups. The World Council of Churches has been a founder of something called the Global Christian Forum that at a large level includes, for example, evangelical folk, perhaps here in the United States, but mostly Central South America, Africa, where issues of proselytizing are huge issues together that people are having conversations about what that means. So I think it's, I don't want to respond by saying, oh, we've got that covered. We don't. I don't pretend for a second that that is true. But the question that we always have to ask is, who's not at the table? Who's not in the conversation? Whose voice is not being heard? How do we have conversations across difference? And I think that's really vital. I'm also aware that our conversation we neglect to have conversations with folks who are secular or spiritual but not religious, or of no religion, whatever, at our peril. It's about human beings. And I'm pretty clear that those are the conversations we need to be having from whatever perspective we are coming from.
We have several questions about the Anglican Communion, and I know that's a kind of separate department. You don't handle those relations.
Good, so I can make stuff up.
How does our membership in the Anglican Communion affect our ecumenical relationships is one question. Another is, do we have an ecumenical relationship with ACNA?
Good question for both. The Anglican Communion has an Office for Christian Unity, with which I am involved. It's headed actually by an Episcopalian this moment, Christopher Wells, and their office hosts international dialogues. And since we're no longer on the naughty stoop, as they called it before, we are not evicted from those conversations. There's an Episcopalian who is on the Orthodox dialogues, which we actually don't have in the Episcopal Church, but they have an international Orthodox dialogue. And we are in closer and closer touch on those issues. I'm a part of an interreligious North America, Europe dialogue related to interreligious relations, and that is part of the whole Anglican Communion Commission on these issues. So I think our relationship is needs to be more in communication, but it's nevertheless very real. ACNA.
And some people may not know what ACNA is.
ACNA is the acronym for a church called the Anglican Church of North America. And it grew out of the separation of certain groups after the election of Gene Robinson as a Bishop of New Hampshire. around issues of lesbian, gay, LGBTQ issues. That ACNA, as I understand it, has since grown. There are people who've been part of that Anglican Church who have no memory of that separation. So, and who are folks who came to that church, say, from more non-liturgical churches and found a liturgical church. We do not have ecumenical relationships at this moment with ACNA. And I heard yesterday, or a couple of days ago, someone describing why that is. And the reason for that at this moment is that as I understand it, the ACNA describes itself as not us. So an oppositional identity is no place to begin an ecumenical dialogue. So we are certainly open to those dialogues. We are always want to have conversations. The Roman Catholic Church at this moment is having what they called conversations with ACNA. I was not particularly happy about that, I have to say, because it's also on the same. Is this recorded? Yes, I guess it may be.
It is recorded.
Oh, well, in any case, I have a beef with them because they have a little note on the Anglican or the Episcopal Roman Catholic dialogue, and on the same page is the ACNA conversation. How different is that? So so there are issues. Let's just say.
So lots of good questions. One is about the Interfaith Center of New York. Chloe Breyer has been here to speak at the forum and to preach. We've done some service projects in conjunction with the Interfaith Center of New York. Can you talk about your intersection with Chloe and that center?
Yes. And I will say, since I just saw Meredith walk in, that Chloe also is on the Interfaith Commission of the Diocese of New York, as is Meredith. And that work is, again, the local work on the ground. I would say our office does not so much intersect with the Interfaith Center of New York in terms of work, because every time I talk to Chloe and say, would you like to do this in some international context, though she is involved in those as well, she'll say, our focus is New York. And she's wonderful about that. The work that has happened at the Interfaith Center, they sponsored a Faith Over Fear training, for example. That is one intersection that I remember. And also, they did training with the police department. I don't know if you all have seen these trainings with the NYPD around how to engage people of many different faiths, especially when you're trying to arrest them and you have no clue why they might be holding a sword. And it's a religious symbol, those kinds of things. So I would say I have a very close relationship with Chloe in a sort of less than institutional way, but we call one another on a regular basis when we need to know how we can do advocacy together from both the New York perspective and the more church-wide perspective, as well as she has gotten me involved in, work in Iran on a regular basis, because that's something that she has been involved in Afghanistan. And so I think that's enough. But yes, I have great appreciation for her, or for the Interfaith Center too.
Can you talk about the Episcopal Church's relationship with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints?
I would love to talk about that. And the reason I say that, because you all are probably not on Facebook with me, but I just had a picture that I took in Times Square at the giving vending machine sponsored by the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints, with which we are very close partners in the Episcopal Church, notably around our humanitarian response. I'm looking over at, I'm thinking there's a close relationship over here with Episcopal Relief and Development as well. in some ways. But the refugee resettlement work that we do as the Episcopal Church, again, not particularly my area, the LDS folks said, we don't do this kind of refugee resettlement work, so they have funded the majority of faith-based refugee resettlement work. Theologically, we're in very different places. I don't think there's any question about that, though the conversations that we have around questions of baptism, around questions of ministry, around the work, the journey they have taken from a lot of the racist practices of their past that they have called to the front and lamented are things that we also have been able to have conversations about. So I think we have a longer conversation to have. I don't think full communion is in our future, but I do think full working together on the kinds of justice issues that we both care about and for the needs of the world is a definite possibility.
And in case you haven't picked up on it yet, the LDS Church is the church commonly known as the Mormon Church.
It is true, though, as I understand it, I am really supposed to say the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints each time.
Yes.
So, yes,
They don't like to be referred to as the Mormon Church.
Yes, I respect not using acronyms, and it's not easy always.
How have the dialogues in which you've participated in enhanced and enriched our own tradition? Is there mutual benefit and admiration?
I'm not sure if the question is about the interreligious dialogues or the Christian dialogues.
Probably both.
Probably both, okay. Well, yes is the answer, and I guess there was a how on the front of that, so I can be pretty specific. I would say that most recently in the Christian-Jewish dialogue of the National Council of Churches, the kind of conversation, the people who participate in this dialogue are all very active in their own synagogues or in their own work it's sponsored by the National Council of Synagogues, but are very active sort of every day in a lot of the issues that we are active in our various denominational spaces, and not least about what's happening in Israel-Palestine. And the last two dialogues that we have been a part of have included experts who have been, I say experts, but experts and practitioners can be experts too, I know, around questions of Zionism, around questions of the definition of anti-Semitism. Those conversations give us the kind of information that I think we need to ensure that as we talk about these issues and as we act on them in our own church, we have the information from our partners and we're not doing it alone. That's also true in the Muslim-Christian dialogue and with Shoulder to Shoulder. There's a Shoulder to Shoulder has just put out what's called a messaging guide, which invites Christian, Jews, Muslims, and all of us to have the tools we need to talk to one another about these very deep differences. To move to the sort of Christian dialogues, for example, the Anglican Roman Catholic dialogue has just finished a paper on reconciliation. And at the end, it's not published yet, which is the only reason you haven't seen it, of course. But, because otherwise it would be, you would have read it already, I'm sure. But at the end of this one is a liturgy that the dialogue has created for reconciliation, using liturgical prayers and practices from both our traditions. And I think that is a way that we, from a sort of what's called a faith and order realm, can share who we are and can share the work that we are doing toward reconciliation, including that is needed for ourselves. I don't know, ELCA, I can't even tell you. Sometimes I'm not sure if I'm Lutheran or Episcopalian because of the work that we've done so closely together. And the advocacy work that we do, especially at the church-wide level, especially working for Michael Curry, whenever there was something we were about to sign, he'd say, "Did Elizabeth sign it?" And Elizabeth Eaton is the presiding bishop of the ELCA. So it's that kind of partnership that gives us a much, much broader understanding of who our people are.
We're coming close to the end of our time, so I'll just fit in a few more questions. You've been doing this work for over a decade. What have you learned over the course of this period of time, and how has the field of ecumenical interfaith relations changed?
Well, I think I've learned that it's more important than ever. It is more important than ever. I am grateful to have grown up. I grew up in a small town in Georgia, rural Georgia. And somehow during the 60s, so let's be clear, it was not sort of easy times. But I grew up with parents who said, there is a world out there, and there is a lot of wonder. Go explore. And that is the invitation that I think we have for this ecumenical and interreligious work. It's hard work to talk to people that we really don't like sometimes, or that we love and we wish they were just like us, but they're never going to be just like us. But that's, to me, that is the peace-building work. I mean, I'm not kidding. When we did meet with the president of Iran and also with his wife, or not the current president, we met with the current president and with the wife of the last one, with a group of women. And we were able to have conversations. Now, does that make any difference in the world? Who knows? But the foreign minister was there. And I think we just have to seek out those places that are unknown, and it transforms our lives. And I'll try to be brief. I think how the ecumenical interreligious work has changed is that we really have, and I hope, moved from this sort of faith and order world, which means how can we get our doctrinal pieces to agree, or for us to say, how can we find enough things that we agree on so that we can actually say we're enough alike to do something together. And that we now live in a world in which we say, how can our differences enrich one another? And how can we engage in the diversity of our whole culture and allow that to infuse who we are? It doesn't take away from our identity. We claim that, who we are. The more we engage with those others, the more we have to say, well, what does it mean for you to be you, or you to be you? And I have to say, well, I got to think about that. So, yeah.
So I'll just fit two more questions in. The project of Christian unity, are we closer now than we have been recently, or further away?
That's an I don't know. But that's probably a whole other forum. Because when I think about the question of unity, I think we have to ask ourselves what that means. And are we closer to connecting with one another at the deepest level? Maybe. I hope so. Have we signed a few more agreements? Well, that too. I'm trusting God on that one.
Finally, how can St. Bart's participate in some of this work at an ecumenical and interfaith level, and what tips do you have for being good ecumenical and interfaith partners?
The answer to the last one is listen, listen, listen. And the other question to me is, there are you are already doing so much, and at the diocesan level, there are these Meredith is deeply involved in that. I think you have a meditation group here that is from a Buddhist meditation group or something. I mean, do that more, and also share the story. Share the story. Engage with your neighbors, which you're already doing, and also at the church-wide level. Again, there are these various opportunities related to the dialogues that we have and the convening tables. I can say more about that another time. I also have a card that I can give you that has a QR code on it to share some of that as well. So let me not forget to at least give those to you.
Okay, so if you're here in person, stick around and get the card. Don't go to church too fast. But before that, please join me in thanking the Reverend Margaret Rose.
Actually, and if they're online, they can look at episcopalchurch.org.
And if you're online, Margaret says go to episcopalchurch.org and you can find out information about Margaret's department. So we hope you'll stick around and join us for worship at 11 a.m., whether you're here in person or online. We also hope you'll come back next week to the forum. We'll be having the Reverend Dr. Serene Jones, who is president of Union Theological Seminary, and will be speaking on the topic of uncertainty, a topic that is very relevant to our time. So see you then.